Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. It is wonderful to have you all here. So welcome to the folks who have just joined us and welcome back to those who were just taking a little break. My name is Rebecca Koronowski and I am the engagement coordinator at Jefferson Land Trust. So just a couple of notes at the top here, of course. I will shorten this because I know we're all getting used to it. If you are in need of switching your view on Zoom, you can do so by choosing the gallery view and the speaker view options in the upper right corner of your screen if you're on a computer, or by swiping left and right if you're on a phone. For the duration of the virtual nature walk, we'll be keeping all of our participants on mute, just so that we can hear our speaker. And I'd love for us all to just take a moment and switch over to gallery view. So again, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, we can all do a little wave and we'll do our group photo now. So I believe we have Stephanie on the line who will be taking some screenshots. I see you there, Stephanie. So hi to everyone and welcome to another edition of Nature in Your Neighborhood. This is a weird time, but we're making the best of it, and it is so great to have you all here. There's no way that we would be able to take 86 people on a nature walk to learn about insects together. So yeah, keep on waving. We're almost done with our screenshots. Yeah, oh, more energy, I like it. Yeah, get the wiggles out before we sit still for a little bit. Woo! All right, how we doing, Stephanie? Good, okay. So let's all use our newfound tool and switch back over to speaker view so you can see me in high definition. So the Land Trust is very proud to present Nature in Your Neighborhood. This is an opportunity for us all to connect and to learn about the important wildlife that we have in our local areas. I would like to say thank you to all of you for being here, and of course to our wonderful volunteers who are putting in a lot of time and energy to make this great program happen. And also to our sponsors, the Land Trust Alliance and Finn River Farm and Cidery for being our host, and to some of our donors who have contributed because of their inspiration for from this program. If you'd like to donate to the Land Trust to support this program and our mission to protect the habitat of some of the plants and animals that we'll be talking about throughout this program, you can go to saveland.org/donate. And thank you again to everyone who has supported us so far. Just a couple other notes. If you have questions, Heather and I are here for you in the chat. Send them away and we will get them sorted out. The way that we've been handling them thus far is that we will compile everything that comes into the chat and share them with the lead naturalist who will be talking during the study group discussion next week. And if you're not present, we will send you an email and follow up so that we make sure that we get everyone's questions answered. So with that, I will pass over to Heather Harding, the co-creator of this program and woman extraordinaire. Take it away, Heather.
Hi, I love it. Whenever I unmute, you're gonna get a swarm of birds singing to you because I'm here in my sit spot. And I'm Heather Harding, one of the creatresses of this program, and also one of the founders and organizers of its sister program, Tidelands to Timberline, which is our Jefferson Land Trust field course. It is my pleasure to introduce somebody who has come to our Tidelands to Timberline field course and taught us about insects, and now he is here to talk to you about insects, and we're really lucky to have him because he has a lot of education in the field of insects or entomology. He has undergrad in entomology from University of Delaware and a master's at WSU in entomology, and 20 years experience working at UC Davis and University of Maryland in the agricultural pest management field. And he came here to be with us in 2012 to have a better place to raise his 2 boys. So that's why he's such great suggestions for the family program. So check that out in the resources portal from firsthand experience with his kids. So he's been doing piecemeal work here in the Port Townsend area for WSU Extension and raising bees. And whenever people ask him about bugs, he's here to help educate, inform, and inspire you. So with no more ado, I will bring to you Richard Lewis, our resident entomologist. Richard.
Okay, hello. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Rebecca. Let me see. I need to get set up here to get things started. It's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to be here today. And, oops. I'm just trying to get my screen loaded up here. And I hope this is working. Is this coming on properly here?
It
Does
looks
that look
great,
right, Rebecca?
Richard.
Okay, good. As I said, I want to give a huge thank you to Heather and Rebecca. This has been an amazing program that they've put together this year under a lot of crazy circumstances. I had the great pleasure of working with the Tideland to Timberline Naturalist course last year. And I'm really excited about them incorporating things about insects into the program. I also want to just say a quick thank you to Ken and Dave, as well as Eric, for blazing the way and helping to figure out how to get some of these things going. And I'll try and move through stuff. I've got a lot of information. The biggest problem I typically have doing something like this is figuring out what not to talk about. To me, it's all interesting, it's all exciting, and I want to just kind of spew out everything about bugs to people so that they can take it all in. But what I've come to find out is that a lot of that can be overwhelming, especially if people are kind of teetering on how much they like or care about bugs. So today's talk is kind of going to focus on native pollinators, specifically bees, that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. But I'm going to start out with a little bit of a public service message about some of the problems we're having with insects and a couple brief messages about some other things going on with invasive species, and then some general entomology stuff to get into that. So without pressing any further on those things, I will just kind of move along. With everything going on, the last thing in the world I want to do is bring about any more kind of bad news. But I feel like it would be a disservice to myself and to insects if I don't mention some of the problems we're seeing right now with insect populations. Rebecca, if you want to go ahead and put up the first poll, I think now or whenever you can is a good time for that. And I just kind of want to get a gauge of what people think about as far as some of the problems that we're finding that cause this issue with loss of insects. And what we're seeing is a major drop in insect populations. What I think is one of the things that we notice, small things get overlooked. Insects just don't get the notice. Things like an orca whale or the salmon that people see, they touch, they feel, that's part of their lives. They get a lot more kind of notice from the general public. But small things like insects tend not to get as much attention. But the fact is that they do matter. You know, the first week of this program was done on birds by Ken and Dave. And, you know, a lot of people notice and care about birds. And the fact is about 60% of the species of birds that we know of use insects as a primary food source. It's estimated that birds alone consume up to about 500 million tons of insects every year. 80% or so of the wild plants are pollinated by insects. So these are examples of how major a role they play in our lives and how they help develop the ecosystems and the stuff that we have going on around us. What we've seen is that it's not just insects. Environmental degradation is going on everywhere, and we're seeing declines in all different species. Are we sharing the results? Well, great. All of the above obviously is the main answer that we're looking for there. And I'm jumping slides here. I'm not sure why. The problem that we're having with insect decline is humans. Everything going on in one way or another is directly attributable to human beings. Our growing numbers are just over-resource use. We're driving all kinds of things to extinction, pressuring systems, pressuring all different kinds of trophic levels, and we don't see a big let-up anywhere in sight. I should mention briefly too, one of the great aspects of this program is that you can go back and look at any parts that you want whenever you get a chance. There's going to be a lot of terminology, different things going on. I've packed a lot of information in. So don't get wrapped up in one thing or another. Try and enjoy what you can listening to it. And because it's recorded, you can go back and see. You can look at any of the parts that you want to. If you have any questions or missed something or want further information, that can easily be provided as well. So there's a great article that came out not long ago in Biological Conservation. It's called The Worldwide Decline of the Entomofauna. It's a review of the drivers, and what they found 4 main drivers causing or leading to the decline of insect species. And these are listed in order of importance. So habitat loss and conservation due to intensive conversion due to intensive agriculture and urbanization is really the biggest problem facing insects right now. What we're seeing is a fragmentation of the habitat. This Nature's Best Hope is a book by Doug Tallamy. He was an entomology professor that I had actually at University of Delaware. And one of the things he's looking at is trying to help develop a network of patchland habitat. What he sees, what there is over 40 million acres of privately owned lawn in the United States. If we added together all the national parks across the entire country, it's less than 20 million acres. So the goal is to get homeowners, private landowners, to start converting some of that land, some of that property into insect habitat. And to do that, it's a matter of just planting wildflowers, native habitat that they can use, help linking areas together. We've developed such small populations of insects that their populations are dying out and they can't recolonize areas because they're isolated. They're like islands. After habitat loss, pollution, specifically from synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, is the next biggest problem insects are facing. They're bombarded by pesticides from all different places. You know, we always point to farmers when we think about pesticides, but homeowners are one of the main contributors. They're some of the worst as far as using them off-label, overusing, or applying in times or places that they shouldn't be. Biological factors, things like pathogens and introduced species are also a huge problem. What we see with bees in this area are all kinds of new pathogens. There's a mite that attacks the bees and is one of the major problems we have out in this area. And of course, climate change, which some places is facing problems worse than others right now. But what we see are a lot of insects that are ranges are changing. They're moving into areas where they weren't before and disrupting local populations. And they're not able to survive in other places where they have been for a long time. At the same time that we're seeing this massive decline in insects, we're also seeing a small number of species actually increase. And you would think that'd be kind of a good thing, but the problem with that is that these guys tend to be generalists, and they're filling in the vacant space left behind by the insects that we're losing. And typically these are things like mosquitoes, black flies, roaches, ticks, which aren't insects but are doing the same thing. So we're getting more of the things we don't really want, less of the diversity and the abundance. At the bottom of this slide kind of sums up the problems that we're having. It's as staggering as they are, these declines, they're basically still invisible to the average person. So you walk outside and you see insects. You'll notice bees flying around, you'll see flies buzzing by. But the fact is, across the board, the numbers are way down. So the example I try and use for anyone that's you know, of the later age group, if you've been alive for 40 or 50 years, if you think back to when you were younger and you drove around in the summertime, almost every time you went to gas up, you had to wash off your windshield. They actually wrote books about how to identify insects that are squashed on your windshield. Now, it almost never happens. I can't even remember the last time I washed my windshield off because of bugs. So it's a calling card. Insects are an environmental indicator. They're like a canary in the coal mine. What we know and what we see is scary. The numbers are dropping off. There's huge population losses, and it's going to rebound and echo all throughout the environment. Birds, bats, frogs, salamanders, all kinds of things that depend on insects. If there's less than half of them around, they're working twice as hard for their food source. So I don't want to dwell on it, but because of the group we have here and the concern we have, I hope that the more this message can get out, the more people understand these little guys that matter are going away, and there's things we can do individually and collectively to help reduce or to deter that problem from continuing. Real quickly, I wanted to just mention the invasive species, the Asian giant hornet. I know that's been a kind of a big news topic lately. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but these are a couple pictures of it. If you see one around here, it's very unlikely, but I suppose it is possible. You won't mistake it for anything else we have. They're giant. They have about a 3-inch wingspan. The body is 1.5 to 2 inches. They have these really amazing faces on them that kind of makes them look intimidating. There was a nest that was eradicated last December over the border in Canada, and 2 individual wasps were found, one in Blaine and one in Bellingham. So they have been in this area. There's none currently that we know of as far as active colonies, but the queen overwinters, and in the springtime will start a new nest. So right now would be the time where any potential queens that survived last year would be starting new colonies. The Washington Invasive Species Council suggests that if you want to sample or test for them, that you wait until sometime around July, which is when populations will start building up a little bit. And they are going out in those areas and actively searching and sampling for any species. We want to get rid of them before they're able to establish. They are bad. It's a very painful sting. Their stinger's so big, it'll go right through a bee suit, even if you have a protective suit on. But they're not typically aggressive towards humans. It's a bigger problem for honeybees. It's one more strike against them. They attack and kill honeybee hives and feed them to their young. So you may hear about them in the news. They've dubbed them the murder hornet, which is a sensationalized name. It's not something that is a huge concern for people, but it is another problem that we would have to deal with if they get established here. So that's it for the public service. I want to move on to insects in general. We have a huge number of insects, over 1 million described species so far. They come in every possible size, shape, and color you can imagine. They make up more than half of all living things on the planet. All other animals and plants combined are less numerous than the number of insects that are on the planet. We've identified 1 million. The estimate on the low end is that they think there's maybe around 10 million different species, and on the high end that goes up to about know all the insects. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, oh, I want to learn about insects, and all of a sudden go out and know everyone. But what you can do is start becoming aware of them. You can see them into different groups. You would be able to look at one and know how to place it into a category. What makes them so successful? First of all, the exoskeleton, this hardened outside shell. It's like a suit of armor, and it resists physical and chemical attack. It gives them a mechanical advantage. So insects have a set of tubes throughout their system to distribute oxygen. They don't use blood like we do to get oxygen to their cells. Instead, they use their blood almost like a hydraulic fluid. So if you think about like a big backhoe that's able to lift a huge scoop of dirt and even hold it there and sit there for a long time, that's a lot like what insects are doing, using the fluid in their body and their hardened exoskeleton. If you think about an ant carrying around a giant leaf for a long time, that gives it the ability to do that without it getting muscle fatigue. So the exoskeleton is an amazing thing that they use, and it also protects them from environmental dust, damage, scraping, and things like that. Their small size allows them to survive in very small spaces and need very little resources. Some insects literally spend their entire life between the two layers, up top and bottom of a leaf. It also allows them to avoid predation. So because of their size, they're able to utilize resources and space and stay well hidden. Flight is not something that occurs in all insects, but it is something that allows them great advantages. It gives them an opportunity to escape predation. They can fly into new areas for expanding populations when they're trying to lay eggs, or move from a place where resources are drying up into a place where there's better resources. A lot of insects that don't even actually have wings still utilize flight. They call it ballooning. They'll get out on the edge of a leaf somewhere, and a lot of them will spin a little silk thread, and a breeze will come by and pick them up and carry them away. There's actually a study that they do on aerial plankton, it's called. And if you go up into the atmosphere and sample the air, there's literally thousands of different kinds of insects just floating around up there, dispersing around. And they'll come settling down into other areas. And if it's a place that's conducive for them to live, they'll do just fine. They have a tremendous reproductive potential. They have a really high fecundity, which means they lay a lot of eggs, sometimes thousands. And they have a very high fertility. So most of the eggs that they lay hatch into viable offspring. And you combine that with a very short life cycle, sometimes a number of days or weeks at most, where an insect can go from a newborn all the way to a reproductive adult. So when you combine those different things together, they can explode populations when they have proper environmental conditions and food sources. Metamorphosis, we could spend hours talking about on its own. There's actually a number of different types of metamorphosis. Simple metamorphosis is just simply an insect or a bug that looks as an immature, a lot like an adult, and all they do is molt to get bigger. And that's kind of the most primitive, simple type. But when we think of metamorphosis, complete metamorphosis is what comes to most people's mind, which is when you have the 4 different stages. You have an egg, a larva, a pupal stage, and an adult. And that only happens in 9 of the 31, 32 different orders of insects. So it's the fewest types of orders that actually undergo complete metamorphosis. But of those 9 orders, they make up about 86% of all living insects today. So it's the most advanced and it's the most successful way of living. And what we see is this breakdown of life resources. So as a larva, a caterpillar, all it does is feed. It's an eating machine. It plows through foliage and it just grows and grows and grows and grows. The pupal stage, which most people think of as kind of an inactive stage because it's typically contained in like a chrysalis or a a shell of some kind, is actually one of the most amazing things that happens in the entire history of insects. Is you think about something like a caterpillar going into a pupal stage and coming out, its entire body completely reorganized, its entire mode of existence completely redesigned. So as an adult, you get a butterfly coming out of this pupal stage, and the butterfly oftentimes doesn't even have functional mouth parts. And if they do, they have a proboscis, and they typically just feed a little bit on nectar for energy. And as an adult, the insect's only focus is mate, lay eggs, and disperse them. So by breaking down these life stages and specializing on different behaviors, it allows them to be unbelievably successful. So again, these are just some of the things that go on with insects that allow them this incredible diversity, this incredible number of individuals, and the ability to develop in all different areas. Flowering plants and insects were both starting to kind of take off about 100 million years ago. Around 65 million years ago in the Cenozoic area, pollinators started evolving with plants. So for about the last 65 million years, this relationship has been getting fine-tuned. And we've seen this incredible back and forth evolution from plants to insects, with plants doing things like figuring out ways how to attract certain insects through scents and patterns and coloration, and insects learning to be dependent on pollen, specifically bees, but other insects also use it as a pollen source, as a protein source. So you get this kind of back and forth give and take, and we've seen an explosion in flowering plants and a complexity of structures and functions that help these two groups specialize with each other. What we now see is many species of bee that are only able to reproduce on the pollen of a single plant. So we have over 13 species of bee that only pollinate from willow trees, about the same number that only pollinate from goldenrod. So if you lose that plant in the environment, 13 or more species of insects are gone as well. So we see this great interdependence upon the plant that the insects are using and the insects that need the plant to be there. So this gets back to the idea of habitat loss and destruction. When an insect can't find the plants that it's looking for, then it needs to be able to get to them, and without that, they're both being lost. So there's a really cool place I just wanted to mention, this Macquarie Island. It's a small island that's located out in the middle of the ocean between Antarctica and New Zealand. And it's a place where bees don't exist. It's the only place in the world that they know of where there's no bee pollinators. And the entire island is basically green to dull green color. There are no flowering plants, there are no colors, there's no diversity that we find everywhere else in the world. It's just a really cool spot. If you want to take some time and look up the island and look up, pollinators on Macquarie Island, it's a pretty fascinating story, and it's one of the few places we know of that can give us some insights as to what the world might look like without this co-evolution of pollinators and plants that have developed such an amazing array of species of both of them. There's actually 4 major groups of insects that do a lot of pollinating. The Hymenoptera are the ants, the bees, and the wasps. Heather, if you want to, this is a good time, Rebecca, if you wanted, this would be a good time for the second polling question. The Hymenoptera, as I said, are the ants, the bees, and the wasps. The Diptera are the flies, and the Lepidoptera are the butterflies and moths, and the Coleoptera are the beetles. All of these groups feed on, utilize pollen, and in turn are pollinating plants. But the fact is, the bees are the only ones that actually use pollen and bring it back to their nest to feed their offspring. So because of this need for the bees to actually feed their young pollen, they are the only ones that are deliberately going to gather pollen. They actually have developed special structures on their body to hold the pollen, and they are dependent on it for raising their families. Also, for non-agricultural areas, native pollinators are almost exclusively performing the pollination services that we see going on out there. There's a lot of things we can do to attract native pollinators to our homes. The things they need are food, water, and shelter. We want to try and eliminate dust and pesticides. Those are things that are killing them or pushing them away. And we want to plant native flowers, native herbs, or other native plants and shrubs. The idea that we want to do here is plant for the specialists. So if we plant things that the specialists need, then the generalists will find something to use. You can see in a lot of these pictures, you can get very elaborate kind of designs and things for bee homes and shelters that they may use. And those can kind of be fun projects. But really the most important thing to do is create habitat that they can use. And that's providing water and food. And most insects will find a place to shelter or reproduce. Although if you want to try and view them and keep them in your area or around your yard, providing a shelter is a great opportunity or way to do that. I'm not sure if we got a chance to do that second polling question, but what I want to kind of move into now is actually talking specifically about bees and the bee families that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. So
I'll just interrupt for a moment. It looks like the polls aren't working for us today, so we'll just move on.
That's no problem. The polling question was going to be how many different species of bees you think might exist out in the world. A lot of times when we talk about bees, the first thing that comes to people's mind is the honeybee. And obviously that's the most well-known and the most popular. The honeybee is actually not even native to the United States. It was brought here from Europe, and it has taken off and it's very widely used, especially in agriculture. The thing about the honeybee is that it can be cultivated in a hive where you get populations up to 100,000 and they can be moved around very easily. So it's a perfect setup for pollinating agricultural crops. But what we have here, there's over 20,000 different species of bees worldwide. There's only 7 species of honeybee. So the vast majority of bees are these other kinds of bees, and they're actually much better pollinators, bee for bee. We just don't have the ability to cultivate and harness them the way that we do with honeybees. So I want to talk a little bit, the 4 families that are in yellow, I'm going to talk a little more specifically about. There's one family that only lives in Australia, and, oops, excuse me. And then there's a primitive family, the Coletidae, is fairly common. We have 33 species here in the Pacific Northwest, but they're a very primitive and difficult to identify bee. They carry their pollen internally. So the nectar and pollen, they don't have a hairy structure on their body to attract or capture pollen. So they're a lot less hairy than a normal looking bee. So they're difficult to kind of look at and see as a bee. These other 4 families, the Halictidae, the Adrenidae, the Megachilidae, and the Apidae, we'll talk a little bit more in specifics. Down in the picture here, it gives you an idea of the variation we're looking at. This little tiny guy is an Andrenid bee, Perdita minima. It's one of the smallest bees that we have. And then this is a giant carpenter bee sitting on top of a quarter. And it just gives you a visual idea of the size variation. There's everything from the tiny to the giant and all the things in between. So bees are all different kinds of colors, shapes, sizes. I also want to mention the 3 families with asterisks on them. They have a number of species that are called cuckoo bees. These bees are kleptoparasites. They're called kleptoparasites because they steal from other bees and then they kill them. So for most of the Megachilidae and the Halictidae, they will go into an area where the bee has laid its egg. They'll kill the egg and lay their own egg, and that egg will feed on the pollen. So the cuckoo bees, again, don't have any structures for carrying or harvesting pollen. They steal it from other bee species, typically from the same families. For the Apidae, the cuckoo bees are bumblebees, and they the bumblebees go in. The bumblebees are social, to see in a minute, and the cuckoo bee goes in and kills the queen, and then forces the workers to raise its own eggs. So every one of these families and a number of different species have developed these kleptoparasites, and they've evolved separately in all those different groups. The only native social bee that we have are bumblebees. They don't form large colonies like the honeybee, but they do have a queen, and she builds a nest and raises young. Typically, you get around, anywhere from 100 to maybe 50 or so bees per nest. It's a medium to large bee, and they're very hairy. These are the guys that are probably the easiest to see. I've been out walking around the neighborhood a lot lately, and almost every single day I go out, I find these. The first 2 pictures is Bombus vossonenskii, and this is a little bee that I found actually on the sidewalk last week, and got a few pictures of it. As you can see, they're very docile. They're not going to sting unless they're disturbed. And the bumblebee does this really cool thing called buzz pollination. And I want to show you a quick shot of what that looks like. So the bee actually disengages its wings and vibrates its body using its wing muscles, which are really large. And by doing this, it vibrates the flower, releasing the pollen in the flower. And you can kind of see the pollen cascading down over its leg and onto its abdomen, but it's difficult to get an idea of just what it's doing. So I have another slide where instead of a bee buzz pollinating the flower, they're actually using a tuning fork, and that gives you the same vibration, allowing the pollen to come out. And you can see how it's just a cascade of pollen. It's like a waterfall of pollen coming out of the flower. And this buzz pollination is something that the bees are able to do, releasing huge amounts of pollen, and a lot of flowers can only be pollinated in this way. So they actually require a type of bee that can buzz pollinate in order for them to do that. So some of the flowers that do that are things like tomatoes and blueberries. So other than bumblebees, we have a large number of native solitary bees. All these other bees that I'm going to talk about the rest of the time don't form colonies. They live individually. And they are extremely important pollinators throughout the environment, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of them. Since they live individually, they don't have a nest to defend or worry about, so they're actually very docile. They can sting, but they typically won't. Making them really fun and easy to kind of observe and look at. They're incredible pollinators, typically 2 to 4 times more effective than a honeybee. And they have behaviors and morphology that help them pollinate. So they're active for longer periods of time. They're functional earlier in the spring, later in the fall, during wetter, colder weather. These guys are out doing their jobs. So I want to look at some of the families that they're from and just talk a little bit about some of the differences between them and some of the things that we can look at as some of the things that they do to help us pollinate plants all throughout the environment. The top row and the bottom row are pictures that kind of match up with the same family groups. The first family I want to talk about are the Megachilidae. These guys are hole nesting bees, so they nest in holes. And there's actually a whole bunch of opportunities now for people to cultivate these around their house. Both the mason bee and the leafcutter bee can be purchased commercially and released, or you can put up nesting blocks around your home to encourage them. These guys most are broken up by the way they make their nests. So mason bees use mud, leafcutter bees use leaves, and you can see in this picture on the side, the top row are mason bee larvae and pupa separated by walls of mud. The middle row are resin bees separated by walls of plant resin. The third row down are leafcutter bees, where the little leaves are wrapped up into little pockets. And the fourth row are carder bees, which use hairs or fibers. So the amazing thing about these bees is that they're only active for a few weeks out of the year. The rest of the year, they're in their little holes as developing larvae and pupae. So this is a box, the one in the middle that I have at my house. You can buy these hole nesting boxes. There's a great place in Woodinville called Crown Bees, and they give all kinds of information and supplies that you can use for setting these boxes up or nesting sites. And it's a great way to encourage the bee. If you just put the empty box up around your house, native populations will come in and use it. And if you want to supplement them, you can get mason bees or leafcutter bees and release them. And typically they only fly around 100 yards or so away from their release point. And if the conditions are okay, they will build up populations around your home. So if you have an apple tree or a cherry tree or a garden, you can use these bees around your area and you'll get a huge increase in pollination services. There's tons of information on the web. Anyone that's interested in doing something with those, you can look stuff up, and I recommend Crown Bees as a great place to start with that information. This family Halictidae are called the sweat bees. They actually collect salt from animal sweat. That's where they get their name from. They're typically small and dark colored. A lot of times they can be confused with flies. They're not usually as hairy as a lot of other bees. And these guys nest in the ground. They actually dig a little hole in the ground and they'll build off little compartments where they lay an egg, supply it with pollen, and then cap it off, and that egg will hatch, feed on the pollen ball, and once it develops to an adult, it comes out and starts the cycle over. These guys are great for pollinating smaller flowers, which can often be bypassed by other pollinators. And we find them both in urban and agricultural, as well as just regular, pristine environmental areas. So they're pretty cosmopolitan. Anywhere you look around, you can find these bees. The last family I wanted to look at or talk about are the Andrenidae. These are the mining bees. Again, these are another type of ground nesting bee. They can be very small to average sized. We have over 200 different species here in the Pacific Northwest. So there's a whole bunch of different kinds of them around. These guys are solitary, but they're gregarious. So if you find an area which they like, which is typically sparsely vegetated, sandy soil, they each have their own little hole or their own little nest, but there can be tons of them together in the same area because they like to find a spot like that that's conducive to them. If you park your car over at North Beach and you're walking up into Fort Worden along the trail there during the spring and early summer, as you walk up that trail up into Fort Worden, you'll see all kinds of bees flying around about ankle, knee height up through that trail. And those are all Andrenid bees. They are all in the ground right along that trail. The last couple years, I've noticed large populations of them along there. These guys also can buzz pollinate like the bumblebees. And because of that, they are one of the main pollinators of blueberries. I actually had someone just last week send me a video asking about what these bees are as they were out in their garden area. and they had all these bees and going down into these holes. And it was these mining bees, which are great to have around. They're very docile, they're great pollinators, and they're really kind of fun to watch. Again, the picture on the left shows you how small some of these guys can be. The large black thing is the head of a carpenter bee, and you can kind of see the antennae and the eyes. And the little tiny thing, the size of about the eyeball on the carpenter bee, is an andrenid mining bee. So bees come in all different shapes, sizes, colors. Getting to know them, looking around at the different flowers out in your yard, you'll start to see these guys. There's all sorts of information. You can get as deep as you want. I try and recommend to people, think about it like moving to a new area. When you first move into a new area, you don't know any people that live there. But pretty soon you get to know your neighbors, you get to know people down at the local store, you get to know people at your favorite restaurant. And, you know, after a couple of weeks, you know several people's name. You start to recognize people. If you see them walking down the street, you say, oh, there's John. Hey, John, nice to meet you. It's the same thing with insects. There's over 1 million species. You're never going to get to know them all. We have hundreds of species of bees here in the Pacific Northwest, but you will be able to know, hey, that's a bee, it's not a fly. Or bumblebee, you'll say, oh, there's a bumblebee, and there's a very good chance just from the coloration and the pattern on the bumblebee, you could figure out what species it is. So, you know, get to know your neighbors, get to know your friends who are around you. You know, I talk a lot about agricultural management and distinguishing between beneficial insects and pest insects. You know, it makes you realize there's all different kinds. And if you get to know the good guys, you don't have some of these negative connotations that a lot of people develop over insects. There's some amazing citizen science projects. Again, all this information is being provided online by Heather, so you don't need to worry about writing things down. Here, right specifically in the Pacific Northwest, there's a thing called the Northwest Bumblebee Atlas. This is a group trying to figure out what species we have here and how many. One of the focal species is a bumblebee that used to be extremely common around here, and now we almost never see anymore. Some of their populations have just dropped off, and we don't know why. We're trying to understand where they might be and what they're doing. The Great Sunflower Project is a fantastic thing to do for families. It's a great way to get you and your kids out in the yard looking at nature. All they want you to do is look at a flower and can't count the number of pollinators that come by. They're talking about doing that on sunflowers, but on any flower you want, if you can go out once a week or even less. They have the most people signed up of any citizen science project, with over 100,000 people involved. And when you get that kind of number of people providing even a small amount of information, it can provide a really great data set. And that's something we don't have. One of the big problems with insect decline is that we don't have any kind of baseline information on how many bugs are out there or what types of bugs are out there. And that's something we can all do, even if you're not an entomologist, even if you don't have a great interest in bees or insects, you can make a small contribution and it can really help a lot. Crown Bees is another place. It's local. It's in Washington State. If you have any need or interest in getting pollinating service in your own yard or your own farm, that's a great place to start and look at. And they have some really incredible information and opportunities there. There's a number of books that I will just not even really get to, but I did want to mention the one website for the Xerces Society. That's another local group that we have here in Washington. And Xerces gets their name from the first butterfly that went extinct. And they are very active in trying to promote to try and help save the loss of pollinators and other arthropods that are endangered. And they're working very hard in the same way I was talking about before of connecting these networks and patches. So looking at trying to develop native habitat along roadways and along telephone lines, telephone wire lines, trying to create habitat to allow insects these corridors so that they are able to recolonize new areas or places where they've been limited and haven't been able to get to because of all the efforts to create or try and re-network these places to allow insects to colonize. So I really recommend checking that website out. They've got great information and some really interesting things going on there. Here's the focal questions and the focal species. Again, I'm not going to get into this much because it's all online. If you want to do some further investigations, I think these are some of the bees that I've picked out, and some of them are really interesting. The death camas bee, the family Andrenidae, it feeds on death camas, which is super toxic to almost all other insects. There is a cuckoo bee. Hopefully during the discussion group, we can talk a little bit about life cycles and the types of plants that these guys use. And I think some of those families of these species of bees will really be interesting for anyone that wants to get into a little further investigation into some of that kind of stuff. And that's it. These are my young helpers. They're not quite as small as that anymore, but they still are loving it. And, you know, one of the fantastic things about this program this year is the number and diversity of people that are involved. So I really encourage you to get out and try and explore some of your areas, even just outside in your yard. You will be amazed. You know, when I first got into entomology, I did an experiment, a collection, and I found over 120 different families within 20 yards of my house. And that's what really set me off as an entomologist way back in the day, is realizing all this diversity, all these amazing creatures that are right here in my yard. And I had spent, you know, 15, 20 years of my life and hadn't even ever noticed it. And I considered myself kind of, you know, into that kind of thing. I loved insects even as a kid, but I just never realized the opportunities that are right outside the door. So again, thank you to Rebecca and thank you to Heather. It's really a great pleasure and opportunity for me to be involved with this. If anyone ever has any questions, obviously there's places through the Land Trust, or feel free to contact me anytime with observations or questions about insects. I'm always excited to hear about them. So I guess that's all I have for right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, cyber applause for Richard Lewis. Thank you so much for bringing a very mysterious part of the world into our backyards. This is really a treat to learn about something that is not so accessible. It's not so easy to learn about insects. And you did a great job with the images and the text and the PowerPoint that you had. So thank you so much, Richard. And now, all of you, this is your challenge to go to your sit spot and notice the insects that you see there, and also choose a focal species. Now, this isn't as easy as it is to just point to a tree or look at a bird. We've gone from birds to trees, and to now we're going to something a little bit less accessible. So Richard and I have been working for the last couple of weeks on how to bring insects to you and how you can access learning this material. So check out the study group activities. You'll get an email tomorrow with a direct link to the study group activities. And Richard has guided you through the process of how to choose a focal species. And it's going to be a bee or a pollinator. And as you saw on that last slide, he suggests some of the specific species to study. But mostly he recommends going out and finding a bee. Look at the flowers, and if you can find a bee, take with you a little container. If it's too fast to photograph, you're going to need to photograph it in order to get an identification. And he did show a good triad of photos earlier. You want to get a headshot and an aerial shot of the back looking down and from the side. So the big question when we were talking about that is, how do you do that with a bee that's flying around? And what he told me is you capture it with some kind of container. We want to always make sure we don't hurt the insects, but if it's not docile enough to photograph those 3 shots from in front and the side and the top, you can actually put it in the freezer for 5 to 10 minutes and it will slow down. Make sure you set a timer because you don't want it to freeze, you just want it to slow down. And then you can get those 3 photographs and then let it warm up and it will fly off unharmed. And then with those 3 photographs, you can go to the resource suggestions that are linked in the study group activities. And I just saw Rebecca sent you that in the chat, and you'll get it on an email tomorrow. And any email that we send you is going to have the study group activities available to you, a link for that through the resources portal. So from those photographs, you now have the ability to identify that bee. And you can do that either through the resource suggestions that Richard mentions, websites that have lots of different resources, or you can send them to studyhelpgroup@saveland.org, and that's also going to be in that email. So send those to us and we will get you an identification. And we can do that with our volunteers, and Richard can help out. So this is my challenge to all of you. We're going to take it up another notch here on the 3rd week of Nature in Your Neighborhood. I challenge you all to study a focal species bee by capturing it, getting the photographs, getting it identified. If you already know what it is, then you can start studying it. And Richard has these great questions for you about which are the questions that you want to study about. How does your bee transport pollen, and what plants does it specialize on, and what time of year are the adult bees active, and what is their life cycle? So you have this incredible guided tour to insects, which is a really rare opportunity, and I encourage you all to take advantage of that through the documents that Richard helped us prepare, the study group activities and the resource suggestions. And also, as I mentioned earlier, he has helped me with the help of his sons find really great opportunities for families. So if you have children or you're a grandparent and you have grandchildren, turn them on to the families activities, and there'll also be a link for that in the email you'll get tomorrow. And you'll see all these opportunities to do fun things with kids and insects, which they're naturally interested in usually. And I have written down all of the citizen science projects that Richard referred to. So I checked out all these links that he gave me, and they are really worth taking a look. So he has really taken the time to get that information to us. So I highly recommend checking it out and making your world a bigger place with the creatures that have more on the planet than any other kind of organism. So thank you, Richard, for all of that. And I am going to pass it on over to Rebecca to make some closing comments.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you so much to Richard. That was so much fun. I've learned a lot from you, and I hope to take some of your suggestions and learn some more throughout the week. So just a couple of things. Next event will be next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Same place. So for the rest of the program, the link to our events will always be the same. The Zoom ID will always be the same, and the password will always be the same. So I will send you many, many emails, but all of them will have the same link in them so that you can get here to the same place each time. So next Wednesday, we will have Michael Machette, who will be talking about the geology of the Quimper Peninsula in our second Extending Your Reach presentation, and I'm really looking forward to it. Michael has a fun and exciting presentation for you guys, and there may even be some challenges that he's going to present. So tune in for that. And then next Friday, we will have the study group discussion with Richard Lewis on insects. So go out and adventure and bring some cool stories back to chat with your friends and neighbors about on Friday. And then we will have a virtual nature walk hosted by our own Heather Harding on ferns. I've heard that Ferns Week is generally one of the favorites in the Tidelands to Timberline program. Heather puts together a really good presentation, so tune in for that as well. And yes, of course, the follow-up emails will always include the recordings and the suggestions that Heather and Richard have shared. There's a lot of resources there, and I definitely encourage you to check those out. Yeah, so with that, I think we'll leave it for the week. Thank you again for being here, everyone. It's so fun to see all of your familiar faces and names on the screen. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next Friday. So if you want to flip over to gallery view and we'll wave it out. All right, take care, everyone, and enjoy those bugs.